Morning, Angel.
Good morning, Colin. I'm multitasking.
How are you today?
Oh, well, I'm moving furniture.
Well, that's always fun and exciting.
Well, I wasn't doing it yesterday. It was my day.
I was gonna say, did you have a good Mother's Day?
I did absolutely nothing and enjoyed it.
Good.
Yes. Ate, watched TV, and went to a little cookout. So it was really nice. Yep.
Ah, 2 o'clock, it's gonna be 4.
Good morning, Sharita.
Hey, Sharita.
Good morning, Ruby.
Good morning.
How are you, Ruby?
Good morning.
How are you doing, Russ?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right.
Am I missing an agenda?
No.
Okay.
No, I literally just sent it out.
Okay. And you got the minutes I sent yesterday?
Yes, it's the Durham opening doors.
Okay.
Good morning, Russ.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, everybody. You want me to share my screen, Ruby? Will that help? If I or maybe Lloyd has a presentation. Is he on yet?
He's not on yet.
We may not get quorum.
I know that Miss Colleen said that she had an appointment today. She wasn't going to be here. That's the only person I know that's not going to be here.
How many do we need for a quorum? I can never remember, and I know we ask it every month.
I think our last calc was 7.
Okay.
7, 8. But if we're not voting on anything, that does help a wee bit.
I guess technically, I guess Robert's rules, can you even call a meeting to order when you don't have a quorum? I don't think you can.
You can call the meeting to order, you just can't vote on anything.
Mm-hmm.
As the meeting is called to order by the chair.
But interestingly, once you call it, once you have quorum remains. I thought that was interesting. I learned that a few months ago.
That's interesting. So even if people leave before votes are taken, you have a quorum because the quorum was called and people left before votes?
I thought that was really strange and I'd misunderstood something, but that appeared to be the case. I mean, I don't know that it would be wise. Being technically possible and being prudent are the same thing.
That's a true statement. Hmm. Who are we waiting on?
Valerie. Colleen's not coming on.
Just Valerie.
Ebony and Malcolm.
Right, Ebony, Malcolm, and then the person that is from DCRC. Yes.
Oh, Jasmine. Did we send her the information in the link?
There's Jasmine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's Malcolm. That's 6, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's 6.
And we need one more. Have you heard from Ebony? Has anyone heard from Ebony?
I have not. Let me see if I.
No, I don't have an excuse access request.
I'll text her. Sharita, we can go ahead and get started if you want to, and then we can just move the dedicated plus down because that's something that would require a vote.
I thought we have it actually listed as a discussion, but But I think I recall from the executive meeting on Friday, Lloyd suggesting that we make it a voting issue if we're ready. But if not, Lloyd, we can wait till next month. Is that correct?
Can't hear you, Lloyd.
Lloyd, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. Nope.
Nope. Can't hear you either, Russ.
I was saying to Lloyd, you're not Zoom muted, you're some other way muted, which is what Russ was doing.
Oh.
Point in case. We try.
All right, well, I'm gonna go because we have limited time. We probably won't get to the last item on our agenda, but I think that's okay because we don't have to have that solidified until June, maybe August. So I'll call the meeting to order at 10:38. I haven't seen the minutes. I just missed it. But the item, do we have to, can we skip the minutes since we don't have quorum quite yet?
And Ebony
Yes.
just joined, so I think we may have triggered.
Oh. Hi, Ebony.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Yeah, I just needed you to make a quorum. That's why I said you
Oh, sorry. I saw your text and then I saw Colin's text. I was on. So, yes, I was like, wait, was I supposed to present something?
Okay, no, you don't have to present. Okay, so at this time, I think we have gotten the minutes in an email. Can we review our minutes? And this is an item, of course, requiring a vote.
Lord, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Yes. We can hear you.
Thank you. Don't know what's going on with my sound system today. Thanks, guys.
Russ, you always, not Russ, Lord, you always make everybody feel jealous because you're getting your exercise in during the meeting.
Well, it's not my
At least-
intent. It's not my
At least
intent.
me jealous. At least maybe not everybody else, but at least me jealous.
You
I'll
can join me
entertain a motion.
afterwards.
A motion to approve the minutes.
I have a motion. I will entertain a second. So the motion was Malcolm, seconded by Angel. All those in favor, put yes in the chat box. Any nays and abstentions have the same right. All right, that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is will be presented by staff and is regarding the dedicated plus funding priority, and it will be presented by Lloyd.
Good morning, everyone. Lloyd Schmeidler with the department. I sent Sharita, the chair, a memo for last week, I think Friday before last week, regarding COC funding priorities for the 2021 homeless grants competition. We are anticipating a competition this year, though there was not one last year due to the pandemic. We're anticipating HUD making available somewhere between $1.5 million to $2 million to the Durham COC for the this year's competition. It's really hard to know with the CARES Act funding and the other funding that Congress has appropriated to deal with the pandemic, whether it's going to be more than that. Our annual renewal demand for our existing projects, they were funded for over 1.5 million in the 2020 competition, so we anticipate we'll be having at least that much. In years past, the COC has offered priorities for the use of any permanent housing bonus. The permanent housing bonus in the 2019 competition was about 5% of the annual renewal demand, so that would be about $75,000 to $80,000. We anticipate at least having that much in a permanent housing bonus. Permanent housing bonus can only be used for permanent housing, either for rapid rehousing or for permanent supportive housing. We're not proposing any reallocations of existing projects in the 2021 competition. Could decide to do reallocations, but we're not aware of any projects at this point planning to or intending to reallocate. So the COC, if it chose to reallocate, would need to do so without the approval of the organizations and the projects they are implementing. This year, the department is recommending that the COC priority for the permanent housing bonus or any new funds the HUD makes available to us would be dedicated plus projects. Dedicated plus projects, as is explained in the memo, provide a bit more flexibility, still focused on chronically homeless people and people who, except for some technicalities in the HUD definition of chronic homelessness, would be considered chronically homeless, except for the technicalities. And that's explained in the memo, as well as some of our reasoning for recommending to provide this flexibility for new projects in the 2021 competition. So with that introduction, I'll entertain questions and respond to questions or discussion.
So I do have just some thoughts that might turn into questions. My concern with the dedicated plus definition is would that require, so I'm asking the question, would that require us to change any of our current prioritization policies that we currently have in place to be more flexible with dedicated plus? The second question is, how do we ensure that we just the most needy person doesn't get overlooked because it's harder to house them for somebody who is easier to house using in a PSH unit? And the reason why I ask that, because I just know that we just have limited units available, I think I would feel more comfortable with it if we had an abundance of PSH, but because we don't, I'm concerned.
Great question.
Lloyd,
Malcolm-
Malcolm, can you see it? I thought I shared the screen, but can you see the memo? Can y'all see it?
I can see it. I just wanted to read it a little bit better. I can't, it's hard to read, so.
Oh,
I agree.
I don't know why it came up like that. Let me see if I can change something.
Do you want me to forward it to you, Malcolm?
Yeah, I mean, my questions are just around some of the money, so I was just gonna like dig into it for a minute and then ask a question around that. So if I could just see it, that'd be helpful, yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. That'd be helpful.
If Hanalea is on the call, Hanalea has been managing the by name list processes and perhaps could explain a bit further how the process would continue to allow our by name list process to prioritize those most in need. I think one of the things that apparently is happening some of the time is that people are most in need. For example, people who had been chronically homeless, got into permanent housing, lost their housing. They could be considered for permanent supportive housing again without needing to be formally or to be formally designated as chronically homeless again and go through particularly the length of time homeless definitions that can be a challenge sometimes. So it would
Yeah,
allow.
that's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lloyd.
Go ahead, Hanalei. I wasn't sure if you were on the call. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's right, Lloyd. I mean, I think the biggest issue this will solve is a key oversight of the chronicity definition, which HUD has recognized with this distinction, which is that someone who is put into, in particular, permanent supportive housing is not successful, return to the COC, should not spend another 12 months trying to regain that chronicity in order to be housed again. And that is something we have seen a number of times in the recent months. This will also give us a tad more flexibility on chronicity time definition because it helps us to address the issue of making sure that people have enough separations in their experiences of homelessness, which won't solve the problem of chronicity for a lot of people, but it probably will help a few. So in general, it won't fix everything, but it will give us a little bit more flexibility to serve those who are high need and who have previously, for some administrative or semantic reason, fallen through the cracks.
So just to clarify, this would not address situations where I know Ryan's mentioned several times, like families coming through FMF, the documentation to trigger the PSH can be very, very difficult because people are very, very flexible in supporting families and friends that have children involved in these situations. Does it address that? If it appears everything else can be shown, but a little bit of the time chronology isn't there? Or is it just what you're sharing?
Unfortunately, probably not.
Okay.
They are still really holding us to having those 12 months of literal homelessness.
Okay.
It gives us, like I said, a little bit more flexibility if you don't have enough separations in between those, but that's not really the issue we see with families. For what it's worth, I will say we are seeing more documentably chronic families coming through. So,
Okay.
there are question marks about why we were seeing about in the past as to whether those families were chronic and couldn't document or what, but lately we have seen, I think largely due to the work of street outreach, a lot more families that do actually qualify under the definition. I do think this will not solve that particular documentation issue when it does arise, though. We have generally been using housing choice vouchers, for which I accept self-documentation, or of course, rapid rehousing for those types of households.
Okay. Thank you.
Keep in mind, when you use dedicated plus, you can't get to this definition of people until you have cleared the deck of everybody who is on your by name list who is documented chronically homeless. So you won't be able to take somebody who is not documented as chronically homeless over somebody who's already on the list with documentation. This
That's
just
not-
allows you to say that.
Colin, I think you have a misunderstanding of the definition. So I think you're thinking about something separate, which is once you fully fulfilled chronicity, then you're allowed to move on. This actually allows us to treat these specific clients. And again, it's a narrow definition. This is not anyone who can't document chronicity, but it does allow us to treat clients who have, for instance, previously documented their chronicity and then been housed through the COC. It allows us to treat them the same as any other chronic client. So we do not have to bypass that client if there's someone else who's chronic on the list. I think that's something separate that happens regardless of whether you have dedicated plus or not. Colin, I think you're thinking of what you have to do in order to move on to the next population, which that certainly is. But for this, it allows us to expand that group who qualify in that first round slightly to include a few additional people who would have fallen through the cracks. We do not have to house everybody who is traditionally chronic first. This allows us to say that all of the, as long as you change the, if a PSH project previously was fully dedicated to chronic households and moves to dedicated plus, then all of their units can be dedicated plus, and therefore any of their units can be to a traditionally chronic client or a client that would be under the expanded definition of dedicated plus.
And so that's why I had the question that I had was, about what that potentially could do to the person who might be more challenging to house, that we should be striving very diligently to house, and the person who is easier to house in that unit.
Yeah, Sharita, I think a few things. One, again, I think the main gap that this will fill for us are actually some of our hardest to house clients, because these are clients who have previously been housed in the COC and not been successful. That's the main way we will use this. It really doesn't give us all that much leeway. Again, it does not allow us not to document chronicity, for instance. I think that the COC itself is very committed to making sure that units are given based on need. We do continue to see, there are just some people who are passed by because we cannot document their chronicity, or we are still waiting on documents. That happens now, and that will continue to happen. We struggle with that, and that's one of the challenges that has been created by these types of requirements. I do not think that this will affect that. If anything, it will allow us to a little bit more purely base our allocations on need rather than who has documents, because we have a little bit more leeway. But I don't think that this will change the COC's commitment to really housing based on need. I think that's something that we really focus on in the by name list, and will continue to do so.
I wanted to make a comment that one of the potential benefits of this in that writing is that you could get some of these households who have, and this happens with some frequency, the households who, if you don't have that continuous year, that you have it in components of 4 episodes or not. And there are many cases of people who have 2 or 3 episodes of homelessness that add up to that year, none that is none that is one continuous year, but 2 or 3 episodes and not 4. And that person is like technically not available for the project. I think that makes a big difference as someone who does chronicity and finds chronicity to be, I stick to the letter of the law a lot. I'm probably one of the people that would say like, I'm guilty to blame if we move slow on this, because it's very particular about how you do chronicity. But I think that this is a benefit to the COC in general to create some more space for projects to have flexibility. And this is, I just want to be clear, Lloyd, Hanalea, this is talking about what we would do for a PSH project, for a new PSH project, if there was a permanent supportive housing bonus or permanent housing bonus and a new project awarded, that would dedicated plus would apply to that project.
That's correct. We are encouraging all PSH projects to consider in their renewal applications changing to dedicated plus. We believe that there is a benefit throughout the COC, but this vote in particular would only impact prioritization of PSH projects that are new projects or expansions.
Okay, so follow up real quick. That means that there has to be a project that says yes to this. I think that that like shrinks the impact significantly in my mind. And then the question I just have for Hanalea is, or for staff is, with our project is 100% chronically homeless dedicated. If you make that dedicated plus change in your project application, what else are we opening ourselves up to in doing that? I do understand the city's recommendation to do that, and I want to make sure that that doesn't cause us an arm and a leg's worth of work to do that as well.
I think to address that question, we'd need to revisit the precise language in the NOFA, which we always encourage our applicants to do as they complete their applications. We're not aware of any negative implications for existing projects to switch to dedicated plus. I think you're right that this recommendation, if it is approved, would apply to specifically only to new project applications that are recommended to HUD for funding. And as you know, those of you who have been around the COC for a few years know that it's been difficult for Durham to get new project funding through the COC competition for a number of years. The only new project we've received in recent years has been the 2018 project of the Durham Crisis Response Center, which was specifically an application for the domestic violence bonus. So that made it a bit easier for Durham to get a new project approved. But whether we can get a new project in 2021 or in subsequent years remains to be seen. Thanks for whoever pulled up this information from the HUD Exchange.
So I pulled it up, Lloyd, because I was just curious about the language in here.
Can you enlarge it so people can read it? Like, my eyesight doesn't.
Can you see it? Oh, it looks
I see
really,
it, but I can't read it.
it looks really big to me. I'm sorry. I don't know why it looks big to me and small to you guys.
If you change your view settings to take the side-by-side gallery off and you just look at it in standard, it might be a little bit
I'm looking at my whole screen is the document. So I don't know why you guys can't see it, because is it bigger?
No, it's better, yes.
Yes.
Does it need to be bigger than that?
Nope, that works.
A tad bit if possible.
I'll just put my glasses on.
Yeah, I have mine on, but I think I'm kind of.
Is that good?
Okay. I can make it bigger. I can enlarge. I got it. I'll turn it sideways.
So Hanalea, you were referencing item number 3 here, reside in a place not meant for emergency, human habitation, emergency shelter, or safe haven for the individuals or families experiencing chronic homelessness, defined with the CFR code, having admitted and enrolled in a permanent housing project within the last year, but unable to maintain their housing placement. Is that what you were referencing?
Yes, that's correct, Sharita. And then the one we were talking about in terms of interruptions, I think is a bit below, maybe number 5. Yeah, that's number 5. These are the 2 main ones that we think will really benefit the COC. So number 3 and number 5.
Put another link in the chat from the HUD AAQ on Dedicated Plus as well. Sharita, do you want me to cut and paste the link that you have there in the chat?
Sure.
Got it.
So what is the documentation requirement here? Like if, for example, looking at number 5, who would document that at least 12 months?
Usually the PSH project tells the applicant what they're looking for, and then it's a combination of the applicant and working with the advice of the PSH project about how to get that. Like that's
right. But when you have a place not meant for human habitation, like unless that person was connected to street outreach, we don't have any safe havens in Durham. So the only 2 options would be place not meant for human habitation or emergency shelter.
Sometimes what we've been using is a behavioral health provider. If they can say that over the course of 2 different appointments, several months apart, that they knew the person was homeless in that time, and they verified where they were sleeping. We can use the police. We can use it's not so much that someone, the way that I've been, and at least that's what sort of like how I've understood it. The residence has to be verified, right? But you have to have someone who's saying, I know that this person is sleeping outside in the time period of which they're. So that doesn't have to necessarily be that someone has stood in their campsite every one of those days, but knows that they are camping in this place. So like, Julia's been able to do that every once in a while too. Somebody like that.
And to that point, this will not really affect that piece of things. We will continue to struggle to get chronicity documented in the sense of finding someone who can verify. This unfortunately will not ease up any of those requirements. This will just give us a little bit more flexibility as to what we're documenting.
So if I understand this correct, more clearly, it has to be a newly funded project. So is an example of that. So right now, Housing for New Hope has those Streets to Homes programs. You have 1, 2, and 3, right, Russ?
1 and 2. They have 2 street outreach projects. I think 2 of them were merged at one point.
But you would have to create a new, like Streets to Home 6 or whatever. It would just have to be a new project that you would designate as Dedicated Plus in order for us to be able to utilize this new policy. Is that correct?
Well, specifically for this funding recommendation, this is a funding priority recommendation for new project funding in the 2021 competition only. So it would make that a priority. Obviously, projects could still apply for rapid rehousing or for chronic homelessness, but we would give a bonus in the evaluation process to projects that address the COC's priority.
Okay.
And it's just for new funding or for existing projects?
Specifically for new funding.
I'm making sure I'm following.
As Hanalea mentioned, we're inviting existing SH projects to consider switching some of their beds to Dedicated Plus to give the COC more flexibility, but it's not a requirement of the COC.
I am. I know we're having a good conversation about this, and I think we're doing our due diligence thinking about it. I don't see a lot of downside in doing this. Just to be clear, like I think that this provides more flexibility without sacrificing any integrity of a project that's going to apply for new funding. That's just my opinion, but I don't think that you're not gonna lower you're not gonna lower the standard so much that someone's gonna come along and do a project with no barriers around it. So,
Right. I'm not so much worried about the standard part as I'm worried about access for what the equitable use of the process. That's what I'm more concerned about more than anything. That's my number one concern. The second issue is if we do this just for 2021, after 2021 is over, then what? Like, does the extra funding go away? Do we have to have a sustainability plan where these people then have to transition to maybe to the voucher program before someone else because there won't be additional funding to help fund dedicated plus? Yeah, those questions. Like, how would that work? Or would we expect as a community just to get offered more money because in 2021 we opted to become a dedicated plus community?
as far as I understand it, permanent supportive housing or permanent housing bonus projects, once they're approved, they're just like a renewal project after that. This isn't money that is temporary.
Correct.
That's correct with the caveat that HUD also, we assume, is going to continue the tiering process where a portion of the annual renewal demand or the total amount that's needed to fully fund all of the renewal projects is in tier 1 and a portion of it is in tier 2 so that it encourages COCs to prioritize their projects and does make it more competitive for especially the tier 2 portion of the COC competition.
Yeah, it would after the first year, it would be viewed as like any other project in the community who would all be held to that same needing to meet tier 1 expectations by doing your project well.
Well, we have had a robust conversation. I know that there have been just certain people talking. I want to know if the people who are kind of holding back right now have any questions, need anything clarified for them, so that we can move forward with the vote. Or Lloyd, I asked a question earlier about, do we have to make a decision today or could it be pushed off to the next meeting?
Well, we would expect that whatever recommendation this committee makes will be forwarded to the Homeless Services Advisory Committee, the HSAC, for a final vote on prioritization at the COC board level. If this committee makes recommendation today, the HSAC can still postpone its consideration of the recommendation until June. We need a decision, I believe, by the full HSAC, at least at its June meeting. So if this committee does not make a recommendation today and waits till June to make the recommendation, then the HSAC would only have between the Policy and Planning Committee meeting in June and the June HSAC meeting for its own deliberations. So that's the trade-off.
So again, I ask if anybody who hasn't really been vocal have any questions, need any clarifications made to make sure they understand. And after we answer those questions, I will entertain whether the decision to vote or to table, understanding that we will then push HSAC into a difficult position in their June voting meeting, because we will not meet in July typically as a HSAC.
Rita, since you asked, I'm one of the quiet ones. And part of that is because I am still trying to wrap my head around what all this is. As I've mentioned in other meetings, this is not my primary area of focus. Is some of these terms and ideas, while not foreign to me, are still not completely in my level of comprehension. If I make a decision, if I vote today, it'll be because I'm relying on the expertise of everyone else in the group and going with what the majority says.
I'm kind of like,
I don't know enough to ask questions right now. I need time to look into this before I can even ask intelligent questions right now. And this is today's the first time I've seen this. So
I'm kind of in the same boat, but I wanted to read over it, but I didn't want to be the one to hold it up from the vote, because I could kind of like catch up with someone on it. Yeah, I'm kind of like that as well. Sorry.
To my knowledge, Lloyd, we don't have we don't need the vote today. It could be done in June, right?
That is correct.
We just need to make a decision before or as soon as HUD releases the NOFA competition. Because once HUD puts out the competition, that's when people would start applying for bonus money. So we would just want to make sure that when we do our local competition, that we have a decision made by that point. So you could delay a vote if what I'm hearing is people would like a little bit more time to do some reading and research and have, perhaps a little further discussion and questions. That would be okay.
I don't mind. I mean, I could do the reading. I don't count me. If you all want to vote, I'm going to vote with it, and I could catch up on reading. I don't want to, stop the process and have to wait that long. So I'm in agreement if, the majority is going to vote for today to agree with it.
I
I could catch up on.
Excuse me, Angela. I think in terms of the HSAC's own deliberations, certainly possible for this committee to share information about Dedicated Plus with the HSAC at the May meeting to indicate to the HSAC this is something that will be coming before the board in June. The Policy and Planning Committee is still studying it, but as the committee will be asking for the HSAC to make a recommendation at the June meeting, but in preparation for that, please review these materials as well, right? So that the HSAC is prepared for a robust discussion and a decision at the June meeting after it has received this committee's recommendation.
I actually feel more comfortable with that because I think it's important, just as Policy and Planning Committee, for us to really, all of us, to really understand what we're agreeing to, where we're stamping, whatever we're doing. I think that all of us, it's important for all of us to understand what we're doing. And I'm gonna try to be more mindful when we have quiet space or the same people talking all the time, to make sure that I encourage people who don't understand to make sure they understand. Because one day Malcolm might not be here, I might not be here, Russ might not be here, Lloyd and Hanalea and Colin may have moved on, and we want the knowledge to still be here, and for the members that are still a part of the committee to be able to make informed decisions and be confident in decisions that they're making. I think that's very important.
If we're gonna send out materials, which
Russ and I, that time is coming in July.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea to
So
send
we
out
feel called out.
materials. I think if we're gonna do that, I would strongly recommend sending the Q&A link that Colin shared in the chat. That is the main link I used to determine that we were not going to have to, that question about whether we would have to go through everyone who was traditionally chronic first. I think it's a really useful tool, probably a little bit more useful than the, just the straight HUD guidance for those who are not as familiar even with what being 100% dedicated. I think one of the challenges in this conversation, I'm guessing, is that some folks may not even be that familiar with what are we doing now? What does that mean? So I think that that Q&A kind of walks you through what are things like now and how would you have that change?
So is it possible for us to get community development staff the Q&A sent out and the recommendation letter that Lloyd sent to us to the full HSAC, so that when we talk about it in May, which I think is very timely since our focus is going to be a lot on housing in May, just housing in our community, I think this would be a good piece to add to that discussion.
It is May.
Go ahead.
It is May. Are you talking about in June?
No, the May HSAC meeting, we're gonna be doing a lot of, it's a pretty much a housing kind of update. And I think, any decisions that we're making around housing, I think this is timely. I would just ask us to get it out as soon as possible so that when we bring it up for discussion, we can have a robust discussion about it, even if it's short. But I think an informed discussion is better than just presenting it to them for the first time. And then I guess we need to talk to Alicia about modifying the agenda for HSAC. Is that correct? To add this in, add time for it. Lloyd, Colin, Hanalea. Okay. And one of you will do that. Colin, you will do that. I can see your face.
Sorry, I had to get the button. I had to get to the button. Yes, we can pull together the memo and send that out to the full HSAC to be ready for discussion at this meeting.
And then in the meantime, if Ellen or Angel, if you want to talk about the document like offline or something like that, we can definitely do that.
And Jasmine also.
And Jasmine, and anybody else.
Also, the dedicated plus discussion is on the May agenda for HSAC.
Okay.
Shereen, may I make one more comment?
Yes.
Thanks. So saying this not intending to like persuade or push people, but sort of for some perspective. And this is one of the things that makes Durham great, right? Like we make decisions that are very intentional and thought out. The thing I'd like to say about this decision is that we're looking at making a slight relaxation of a definition to make it easier for people to move into housing at a project that, for a bonus project that has not yet been rewarded to an applicant that has not yet come forward, that could be $77,000 or maybe up to $388,000, which is a bigger number. But for $77,000 for it was permanent supportive housing, just to give a feel, that would be somewhere around like 9 people that a project might support in housing when you divide the subsidies out by 12 months. So if you're thinking that a subset of that population gets affected by dedicated plus, you might be looking at, say, 2 people who would be changed by this definition at a figure of something like $77,000. You would make that bigger potentially if you had a larger project. But just to point out that that's kind of the scale of what we're talking about making one of these decisions. I do think it's really important that people understand what dedicated plus means. And I also think that our group has asked to table things sometimes. And when we're tabling decisions about whether or not we should make a funding priority for $1.5 million of a different funding source, I think that's really valuable. I'd just like to say that this amount of money is less than that. And I don't see a ton of downside around creating more avenues to get people into housing. And then the last comment that I want to make, because I think there's only a couple of us who have been on the PSH calls, is that if there's a question about, is it equitable for people who are hard to serve to get into housing, I think, and Hanalea can correct me because Hanalea, runs the meeting, but I think we're making a really honest effort to get the people who have been on the list a really long time into permanent supportive housing. And part of the time, if we're moving past somebody, it's because we can't find them. It's because decisions are really difficult. There are disability concerns. The nature of the person's disability is making it really difficult. And I don't think that we're just, I don't think that we're like, this one's really hard, or I feel squeamish about putting them in my project, so let's see who else we can get. I actually commend our group a lot for not doing that. So just a couple of thoughts I wanted to add for people to take into account and perspective. Thank you, Sharita.
Thank you, Malcolm. Does that change anybody, lean anybody to do anything different from the plan we were discussing?
This is Jasmine. Can y'all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm probably very much in the baby boat compared to Helen and Angela, mostly just because of my new exposure to this. But I would say, to Malcolm's point, considering the amount of dollars that we're looking at, I definitely wouldn't want to be one to hold up, considering that, one, it is another avenue to get, even if it's a couple people housed in our community, and also DCRC would be more of a referral than one who would be actually shouldering any of the document. Well, we would provide what we can, but meaning we wouldn't really necessarily be a part of that process outside of referral. And so I definitely wouldn't want myself or DCRC to hold up this opportunity for the community, especially if those who would be applying are interested in doing that. If that makes sense.
Angela, Helen?
I will agree with that. I would not want to hold up the process. However, it's my understanding that by taking a little extra time so that those of us who are less in the know have a opportunity to get a better understanding of it, if we take that time, we're not really holding it up. And if I am wrong in that, then let's vote. I'll vote yes, even though I don't completely understand. Because I agree with Malcolm. Malcolm, you're very, very good at explaining things in ways that makes it easy to understand, and I appreciate that. So I would vote yes, but again, it's not because I have a strong, full understanding of it. It would be because I wouldn't want to hold the process up. If we have time to allow those of us who need a little more time, that would be great. Let's take it. But if we don't have time, we'll do it. We will go along with it. At least I will.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I won't speak for the rest of you.
No, I feel the same way, Helen. That's what I was saying. I don't want to hold up the process. If it needs to have the vote on it today, I can, I'm quite sure I could piggyback on someone to get a better offline understanding of what it is. But I'm in agreement,
So it's totally up to you guys. I just want to always be mindful that everybody doesn't understand what some of us understand. And if we're not around and you guys become the next level of, decision makers or people who influence other folks, I want you to be very confident in being able to do that. So the choice is totally up to you guys. And at the end of the day, the HSAC could decide, even though we make a recommendation, that they don't want to do it. Or we can rush and make a decision, and we don't come to any kind of consensus. It's totally up to you guys how you want to do it.
Well, I would prefer if we can, and go with Lloyd's suggestion.
I think we'll do what you guys want to do. I was prepared to vote either way. Even though I had some concerns, but I was willing to vote either way. So it's the ultimate decision that we're going to execute the first plan, or we're going to bypass that, make a decision to what it sounds like, decide to expand to dedicated plus, and submit that to HSAC in May.
Well, can we take a vote to vote?
Let's
I mean, I don't want it to be you know, because of, you know.
I don't want
not
y'all to feel, I don't want
understanding.
y'all to feel like y'all are holding up the process. Malcolm is going to
Oh, no, I
transition
just-
off in July, even though he may still attend some of our meetings. We won't be able to get his articulate way of being able to break it down and make it plain. And you're gonna be expected to be able to make the decisions next year, possibly without someone like Malcolm. Do you want to make a decision today, or do you want to take some time to make sure that you're confident in the decision that you make?
I'm ready.
Let's make sure, if everybody's voting, let's make sure everybody understands what they're voting on, so that if you're asked outside of this meeting, hey, what does this mean? You have enough knowledge to be able to explain it to somebody in the
Right.
community. I don't feel, you know, I wouldn't feel comfortable making a decision on something if I couldn't explain what it is that I was approving or not approving and why to a fellow COC member.
One thing I'd like to add is that Sharita's point is really valuable for all, and in respect of anybody who sits actually on HSAC, because I don't. My understanding of this committee is that it is created to place for HSAC to put its trust in its recommendations to then bring to HSAC, and not have HSAC members have to go through the same sort of rushed feeling of, I want to evaluate this and I don't know if I can trust where it's coming from or not. And what I'm hearing is this group wants to be the trusted source to provide that information. And I think that that is the right way that the city, that the COC should be moving in coming years regardless, right? Moving absolute responsibility off of the HSAC and bringing it to other parts of the community to create more shared decision-making. So I'm in favor of, if it's not creating significant barriers, of this group getting an understanding of what that definition really is, and making an informed motion to HSAC at the next meeting.
Is that a motion? Is that a motion, Malcolm?
Yes.
So I have a motion from Malcolm for us to make sure that we are.
I motion that we table making a formal recommendation to the HSAC board until our June meeting, at the time when all members are fully versed and aware of the language around dedicated plus, so that we can make something we can really stand behind for HSAC. You got the gist of that, Russ? Good.
Second.
I will entertain a second. I think I heard it from Helen. Is that correct? All those in favor, please vote yes, or no, or abstain if you're abstaining in the chat box, please.
Madam Chair, if I might, as people are voting, let me try to summarize the key decisions in this matter. Fundamentally, the committee is to make recommendation to the HSAC around how we might use permanent housing bonus in the 2021 competition. You can choose first to recommend prioritizing rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. The lead agency is recommending permanent supportive housing. And secondly, within permanent supportive housing, the committee can decide to either prioritize chronically homeless people in general, which would simply be dedicated to chronically homeless people, or a dedicated plus project, which provides the flexibility that we've been talking about this morning. So those are, in my mind, the key decision points the committee has to make.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. It looks like our motion carries. This will be an item requiring us to vote in our June meeting, but we will have a discussion in our May HSAC meeting about dedicated plus again. And then in the meantime, if anybody has any questions, we can talk about it offline. So we went over time.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm clear.
Go
Do you
ahead.
want me to send these? Do I need to send these links to the committee? Because we're not sending all of this information to HSAC at this point. We'll send it for the June HSAC meeting, correct?
So the Q&A that Hanalea said was helpful, I think would be good, if nothing else.
Sent to this committee.
Say it again.
Do you want me to send it to this committee or do you want to send it to the full HSAC right now?
I want us to send it to the full HSAC right now. We're gonna discuss it in May because it's on the agenda. So I think they need to have
Okay.
some knowledge of it before the May
Okay.
meeting. Thank you guys for that conversation. We have shared housing as the next item on our agenda. It was slated for 20 minutes, but I think we went over about 15 minutes on the dedicated plus discussion. So if we want to get back on track, it would only be 5 minutes, but we can entertain that because I think the next item on our agenda is our transition plan or return from pre-COVID, and we can just conclude our meeting after having that discussion with whatever remaining time we have left. So I will entertain the discussion about the shared housing process. Colin, are you prepared to talk about it?
This was something that we had brought up to the HSAC executive committee and thought we should at least make policy and planning aware of it, that there is an opportunity for our continuum of care to have a training and perhaps make some sort of a effort and prioritization into utilizing shared housing as an option for getting people into permanent housing, as we're finding more and more rental properties are further out of reach budgetarily to our constituents who are experiencing homelessness. And the thought is doing some training and some focus work on how to run a successful shared housing program, and wanted to just sort of bring it to the group's attention. And Lloyd can fill in some of the gaps. He's done some training, been part of some trainings of it, and brought this to the table, and trying to get some commitment that is this a direction we want to go as a continuum to try and expand our capacity to get more people into permanent housing as housing prices are getting further out of reach.
So to fill in on that, the idea of shared housing is basically that two or more unrelated adults are renting a 2 or more bedroom unit together, and each having a separate lease with the landlord, sharing a portion of the total cost of the rent or the lease, but they agree to rent together and can also decide independently to move out of that and their lease. So a number of communities around the nation are supporting and promoting shared housing as another resource, another way of responding to the increases in housing costs, as Colin mentioned. And there are a variety of ways of promoting it. Obviously, client choice needs to be a big part of it. People need to choose their own roommates or their own, lease mates, and make their own commitments. And case managers, obviously, it's been very, very key and emphasized a number of times in the trainings I've been a part of, that case managers really need to spend a lot of time with people at the front end of a shared housing agreement, in the process of getting the interest and the commitment, and then as people move into a shared housing arrangement, to help them navigate differences of opinion and conflicts, and do conflict resolution. It's certainly not a solution for everybody. It's primarily being used for single unrelated adults rather than families, but one could envision some situations perhaps for families to rent together, but that would be more unusual. Since we don't have more time, it's all we'll need to say about it at this point, unless you want to have more discussion.
But Lord, there is a plan to have a session a technical assistance session in June, correct?
The current plan is for the director of the Shared Housing Institute, Jamie Taylor, present a 90-minute session about it on June 18th as part of our effective case management in the homeless housing system, correct?
Is there any way as a preparation piece for Lloyd or someone on the homeless services team to send out kind of some survey to all the agencies doing housing projects to find out their experience with this? I mean, I think it might be good to suss some of that out in advance. I mean, we have some, I'm sure others also have experience, excuse me, not articulating that well. Just so we know that in advance as a community, maybe it can be filtered to the TA provider to know a little bit that like it's not out of nothing for us. And we have particular challenges here. It'd be great for them to help us address those.
That's a good point. We can,
I mean, simple survey.
we can work on that as a team. I think part of the challenge of that is getting people, I think there have been a number of surveys being circulated, and getting people to respond to surveys sometimes can be a challenge, but
sure.
I'll give you the survey response that for Dash, we don't have anybody in shared housing and don't have experience with it. So there's one response for you.
But you know, I think Russ, this is I was before Lloyd and Colin brought it to my attention. This was the spirit in which my question to you about how your SRO was going came from. It just aligned. Very well because
I wasn't catching what you were throwing.
Right, your SRO model is this thing. That's
Hollow. It is Holloway Place, but Cynthia's had experience with it with rapid rehousing. I mean, I think Holloway Place has been fine. It's just a lot of convincing people to some extent, but rapid rehousing has been a different challenge, I think, over the years. Multiple phases of attempts. So
well,
learn.
My interest around that was how was it going so well that Housing for New Hope considering doing another SRO? Just a thought. Didn't know what you guys had around, but just a thought.
There is some broad conversation around different affordable housing developers of basically how you take, you know, if you've seen modern student housing where you've got, you know, kitchen, living space, four bedrooms, each with its own bath. That's key, which we learned through Holloway Place. There is discussion about that from a number of developers. I don't know how far it is. I mean, we've had some conversation with them about it, but I think people see it as a product that needs to be brought online. The challenge of not having your own restroom is big, honestly.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
You know, I think just my only concern that comes up with the shared housing is what landlords around here would actually jump at the bit to actually do it. What current rooming house situations, you know, folks who have they don't have a lot of oversight right now who would be willing to open themselves up to a little bit of oversight as far as how they manage their properties, because that would be the stock that I feel like we could utilize the fastest if the bathroom situation is addressed. But yeah, just curious. Malcolm, you were going to say something?
I mean, I have a nice list of questions for a trainer about this topic, and I can say them out loud or I can say them at that training time. It's either one, but yeah.
If there are questions that would be helpful on a survey, please feel free to forward them to us, Malcolm.
So with this program that they're talking about, if it was brought to Durham, could they start it off, because it would be a bathroom issue? So could they start it off like a duplex with 2 people at a time? Would that kind of like help with the bathroom issue? Because there's a lot of little small duplexes that's in Durham that they only really fit for 2 people. They have a lot of small 2-bedroom apartments in Durham. Would that help?
I think any size unit we could get would help. I think it would be a matter of us finding the landlords, property managers that will be willing to do it. I think that's gonna be our biggest challenge. But I was just wondering, is there any of our current funding that would maybe support maybe bathroom installation or anything like that? If we had somebody interested in doing it, is there any funds anywhere?
I'll be honest, the retrofitting is just tremendous. I mean, if Holloway Place, we would have put more bathrooms in if it had been possible, but when you get into the piping for toilets and things, that it's a killer, unfortunately.
Incredibly cost prohibitive
Yeah.
and time
Wow.
consuming for permits and planning and everything else. You're looking, yeah.
But I'm in general, I think the conversation would be terrific because there are surely pieces we can learn and that we are missing in trying to implement this and it would go a long way.
Especially the
Potentially
matching process.
outside of the bathroom piece. Yeah.
But maybe the matching process and how you do that, and maybe if there are any
Yes.
templates that they use that have been effective, I think that would be very informative
Yeah.
for us.
That'd be great. I'm glad we're going to have this opportunity.
Lloyd, what was the date for that presentation again?
June 18th at 10 a.m.
Thank
Be a Zoom meeting like this one.
I think we have a lot of interest, Lloyd, and Colin and Honolulu. I think it's going to be informative.
Feel free to visit sharedhousinginstitute.com. Sharedhousinginstitute.com.
I was just having a thought idea. So is this something that, we can have a conversation with the people that we're trying to provide this service for, the homelessness? I mean, we could kind of like get some feedback on, from them I'm just throwing it out there as well, because it's services that's gonna be for these people, for, and I know we make a lot of decisions or, try to make the best decisions for that community. But I think, and me being homeless, but I haven't been to the extent where a lot of people have been chronically homeless. And I think that conversation, having them involved in something that's trying to help them, I think that, to me, that would be a good idea as well.
I think that's a good point, Angel. Certainly, again, client choice is very important. And we know one of the obstacles sometimes for people getting off the streets or back into housing is concern about loss of community, loss of their friends. And this could be a way for 2 or 3 people in an unsheltered situation, potentially a case manager could work with them to say, we can work with you to get a place where you all can be together and continue to support one another in sobriety or in whatever your people's personal goals might be.
Because, and I'm sorry, from, my experience this past year, meeting a lot of the people that are out on the street, and, I think, we make plans for them to be housed, but we need to try to like get some kind of program to like families moving forward. They like prepped us. Like we took classes while we was in there, health classes, home classes or whatever. Because, people, when you're out in the street, you've been homeless for so long and you just put in a place, a lot of people can just, they could use it or lose it. And I guess what I'm trying to say is like, include them in some things, they could, it's kind of like some training, so because, you're stepping into a situation that a lot of people have been like out on the street for years, and that's all they know. And so, it's kind of like what's not foreign to us, it would be foreign to them. So I'm just trying to, include their thought tactics, or they might have some ideas that might help with their situation as well, being this about them.
Actually, you're exactly right, Angel and Lloyd. I worry about my people more when they're housed than when they're on the street. Because normally when they're on the street, they're in their places where they're comfortable, they're
Yeah.
around their people that they know who they are. And when they get
Exactly.
into these housing situations, they become lonely for the first time in a long time. Because, you know, the first thing we tell them is your friends can't come here and stay.
Right.
But that's what gave them comfort and solace when they were out there on the street with nothing over their head, you know. So I worry about, they experience a different level of loneliness in housing. Yeah, many of you know, I'm not gonna say her name, the little lady that walked around Durham for the last 10 years. We have had more problems with her adjusting to being in her unit than anything. She
Right.
pays her rent on time. She does, but she is so, she's lonely, and COVID didn't help, you know, because that you can only see people from a socially distant perspective, or people weren't seeing people at all. So that is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, because you know they have a bond. You know, they have a bond together. They kind of like really stick together, and like the ones that are at the tent city, they be like, look, I don't want anything. We good here. We don't have to go by these rules or regulations or this, that, or the other. And they're pretty much, from being homeless for so long, that's their comfort zone. And it's kind of like doing White Flag. It was a gentleman there, and he had mental issues, and he was put in a room, and he was like tearing the room up. You know, he wasn't used to that. You know, it's like being confined, because it's something that's out the norm for him. You know, even though we're all trying to help people get housed, you know, we have to help them mentally as well first, because before they can really move forward to be housed and whatever.
Yep, I agree. Anybody else have any comments on this? We are winding down on like 12 minutes left in our meeting, and I would like us to at least start getting the last discussion of the day, of today's meeting.
I would just like to say thank you, Angel, for sharing that. Like, I never thought what it was like for families who have been homeless for a long time and now have permanent housing. In my mind, I thought it was the greatest thing that they now have permanent housing. It's like, oh, wait, great, let's move to the next person. But I never thought what it would be like for them in this new place. So thank you for sharing that.
Yep, thank you, Angel. So the last item on our agenda is the return to pre-COVID status. And I think I've been wanting us to have this conversation for a couple months, just out of fear that it might happen suddenly, and we won't have a plan, or we won't have thought about it at all. And I don't expect us to be able to get this hashed out in the next 12 minutes. But today I have two questions that I kind of want to pose to the group, and we can just try to start tallying some stuff up. And then I will hope that in our June meeting, we can revisit this conversation. And hopefully we won't return to pre-COVID in the midst of that happening. Right, Colin? But I think that we need to get ahead of it and just talk about what do we need, or what will we need when that happens, and what our concerns are. So if 2 weeks from now we find out that UDI is closing down and everybody is coming back to UMD, what do you think we would need, and what would be your concerns? The floor is open.
Say that again, Rita. Rephrase that again for me. I'm sorry, I walked away from the phone. I apologize.
So I said, if we found out that in 2 weeks from now that we were no longer going to have the medically vulnerable space, and that folks were going to return to UMD at full capacity, or there are various places where they are at full capacity, what do you feel like we need to have as a community, and what would be our concerns right now today? I think these discussions will help Colin be able to go back to the emergency response folks and advocate for our needs before it's too late.
Actually, wow, needs. It's so many needs out here because like I always say, homelessness is built in 4, 5, 6 different categories. So you kind of like really got to deal with each group of categories because you got the mental illness, you got the drug addiction, you got the con artists, you got the mothers with kids. I mean, it's all different types of categories, but everybody is just all all fit in together.
So when I ask about what we need, like all of that part that you're saying is so right, and we're not gonna be able to fix that in the timetable. So I'm talking about like in order for people to go back into the shelter, what do we need to have in place? What do we think we need to have in place if the whole population moved out of the spread out space and they came back together and were all confined under, one place, which I think at this point would be UMD. What would be your concerns about us returning to that now? And what do you think we need to have in place to ensure there's not an outbreak or, so this is specifically related to people no longer being socially distant because everybody has to go back to where they were pre the pandemic.
I guess it would help if everybody had the COVID, had the shot, and then I guess secondly, enough space for everyone.
Aggregate data on the number of people who received a vaccine during the events that were targeted at the homeless population. Aggregate.
That's really hard to figure out.
Yeah.
Just because of all the HIPAA rules, we've been trying to figure that out.
And part of that too is when they keep the records of who's receiving the vaccines, they don't say this person's homeless versus this person's not.
Oh, okay.
My question is, what are people receiving at CDI that they would not get at UMD other than having their own room?
Cable.
Yeah. You're right. TV.
You say cable?
You're right. Cable. Your own bathroom.
That's a deal breaker right there.
And a microwave.
Anything else? Like my thought is, if we were to have an upswing in positive positives for coronavirus, where would they go? That's my question.
Oh, wow.
They could not stay at UMD.
Right.
Where would they go?
Right.
I guess put them at CDI.
A place to
CDI is
quarantine.
gone. I said CDI would be gone. So where would we put them?
Well,
wow.
So that's a good point, Sharita. And I think at this point, there is, the county is looking into trying to extend CDI and the duplexes and waiting to find out how long that might extend. And if non-congregate shelter is no longer reimbursable, CDI may come offline, but the duplexes may remain in place for people who test positive as a place to recuperate. So there is some thought of that. And then we were given guidance that should every room in the duplexes be completely occupied, exigent circumstances would allow for additional motel rooms to be purchased if there were, God forbid, a giant outbreak.
But it would be room at a time, one room at a time?
It would be, yes. So if you had all of your duplexes full and there were 2 people, then you would pick up 2 rooms. If there were 5 people, you'd pick up 5 rooms, or you'd pick up 1 room and put 2 people in. If there were 2 people, you might put 2 people in 1 room, depending on how it's set up.
Yeah, that's a good question though, Sharita, because actually that's going on now because they still out here in the street, nowhere to go.
Right. My other question would be, so you now have all these people confined in one space. UMD's policy is they don't want you hanging around here, but we will then have medically vulnerable people here on site. And I'm saying here because that's where I am, here on site. What would be the expectation? Where would they go during the day? Would
They
there,
don't go?
is the expectation that medical vulnerability would no longer be an important factor in their ability to stay inside the shelter during the day? Does the shelter have adequate staff if that's the case and they need to have people inside? You know, like those are the other questions for me. Because if the people their conditions were so persistent, you know, that we had to put them in a separate space. You know, now, yeah, I know we're not in a pandemic, but these people still have medical vulnerabilities that make it very difficult for them to be out all day in the middle of the heat of the summer.
And
So
it's gonna be that's gonna be a big problem right now because, you know, right now, well, what they did in the winter was just rode the bus all day. You know, you just ride the bus all day, get on one bus, ride another one all day, you know, and like now it's getting ready to be really hot outside. So where do they go? All these empty buildings around here. I mean, it's nowhere that someone can get a building on each side, or what is it, north, east, west, and south out here. I'm not for sure. And I like have somewhere for people to not just lie to God around, but you know, I mean, not have to be out there in that heat like that, because it's going to be mothers with kids. And if this eviction thing moratorium doesn't go right, it's going to be a whole lot of more people that are homeless. And that's something Durham does not want to be able to have to go through. And that's fact. So they don't have anywhere to go right now.
Malcolm,
One of the questions
yeah, go
one of the
ahead.
questions I wonder about is the level of partnership with the library now that the renovation's complete.
Well,
like-
the other thing you have to take into consideration is that just because there's a decision that people in the shelter are going to go back to the shelter space doesn't necessarily mean that the buses COVID precautions are going to go away. The library, if they have any COVID precautions, is that going to go away? We still may be in some of the places where our folks frequent in a COVID protected, you know, protocol still. So it makes, that means you can't ride the bus all day because the bus can only take so many folks, and then it has to go offline. Like that bus has to pass you by. I don't know if people were aware of that. They changed the sign to bus is full. You cannot get on that number 3.
Yep,
you have
sure
to wait
can.
for the next number 3. And so if our folks are using the bus as their day space because they don't have anywhere else to go, what's going to happen? They're going to get put off on the bus in random places. Is the bus going to start banning people from being on the bus because it's interfering with people that's trying to go to work? You know, like we really we really don't have time to really go into this conversation, but I think just having just the beginnings of this conversation kind of sheds a whole bunch of light on a lot of things that we really don't think about day to day about what a transition back will look like for a homeless person that used to, you know, have full advantage to use certain things in our community. They may not have that. Do we need a day space? Does the day space still need to be socially distant?
Yes.
Is it going to be Nehemiah? Is there room for that? Is Nehemiah invested in being that? Do people now need a ride to get down to Nehemiah during the day? I think it's just a whole bunch of things that we really need to think about, and we need to inform the emergency response people that these are our folks' reality. This is what they do.
That's right.
Normally, pre-pandemic, these are the things they did, and those things are not available for them. So what is going to be a solution that's going to work from not just the homeless person themselves in this shelter, but also as they kind of roam around their community?
Exactly. And the bus is not going to be free for the buses. They're not going to be free for a minute. They're going to start charging. So right now, people are able to get on it because it's free.
So a lot of our medically vulnerable people, we can sometimes get them discounts and things like that, or get them free rides depending on their age and things like that. So that might not necessarily be a barrier for them.
I would love to see a facility for individuals to be able to seek shelter, you know, during their time.
So we're right at 12. I'm sorry, Angela.
Go ahead.
I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but we're right at 12. We're actually at 12:01. I don't know if Colin wanted to say something just at the end of this conversation to kind of close us out, and then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. And I will ask you to think about these 2 questions and be prepared for part 2 of this discussion in our next month meeting.
And if you think of things, please send it to me between now and next month's meeting because we have regular conversations. I think it's important for us to remember emergency management and public health is here to deal with the COVID pandemic and the emergency response to that. Once that has been determined to be over, their role is gone and it's on us to figure out the next steps. So what we can say is we need to make sure public health is aware that whatever the trigger point is, that we go back to urban ministries. When we go back to that, social distancing guidelines, those things will have been lifted or at least reduced in some capacity. So it's important for us to be thinking through, okay, what is it that when this happens, do we need shelters to stay open longer during the daytime? Then that's a conversation we need to be having with urban ministries. Do we need to be talking to Nehemiah? Then that's something that we as a homeless system need to be sort of initiating those conversations. Emergency management, once we hit the trigger point, there'll be a handoff from their lead role back to us as the lead role for taking care of those who are experiencing homelessness in the community.
So my last final comment, urging Colin, and I get to say this, and I'm sorry that you get to be the one in the meetings, but the biggest comment that I have is that there can't be parallel processes for different members of society. Like this conversation is operating under parallel processes that the homeless population does not have the equal rights that the rest of us have, as the ability to enter these places under different roles. And so to establish a framework with all of the entities that include the relaxing of social distancing requirements should understand that just like when we do accessibility features on all properties, we do those for the people who are the least mobile, that we have this conversation from that place first, as opposed from a different from the perspective of like, what is the normal life that that people of means live by, which is not a real thing. It needs to be that the accommodations are for all people to be accommodated by. So that would be my urging, to say that that we push back a little bit around the component of you can't create a population of people, ask for them to hide because you don't want them in the buildings that they're going to when they have literally no other options. That is less of that is infringing upon the human rights that they barely had prior to the pandemic.
That's a really good point, Malcolm. And that's the piece that we've been sort of talking about and trying to figure out what are the, and as of now, nobody has said, here is the, when we hit X, everything goes back to normal. And nobody has been able to define what that looks like. And what we're trying to do is trying to think through how can we get ahead of this and be thinking down the line and be contributing concerns or, hey, what if? And there's, at this point, North Carolina may choose to do this. CDC may say this. Local public health may say this. And we want to make sure that our voices are part of that discussion with our public health people. So I'm trying to convey that to the public health team, and that they can take that when they're sharing on the statewide calls so that they can be looking at it. So I appreciate that insight, Malcolm, on making sure that we have a system that's equitable for all, not just for people who have a place to go and a job to go to, but the people who don't have anywhere to go and will be back out on the streets if they are not able to get into permanent housing. It's also important to remember that we've got a lot of extra money in the system right now to help people get out of homelessness. So it's important for us to make sure that we really utilize that to our fullest extent, because this is one of those once in a lifetime opportunities that you've got, 5-10 times the amount of annual funding coming in that has to be used in a short period of time.
Right.
FYI, the ERAP program went live 5 minutes ago.
Yep, it sure did. Well, thank you everybody for this robust conversation and a great meeting. We will be talking about officers and definitely this return to pre-COVID in our next meeting for certain. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting today.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Who was that? Who said second? Ebony?
I did, yeah.
Okay. Motion made by Malcolm, seconded by Ebony. I think all are in favor. You can say yes.
Yes.
And we will adjourn. Great meeting.
See y'all.
Take care.